Okay, today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2013. My name is Jenny Klein, and I am interviewing Mike Eberle. We are at the Wilmette Public Library in Wilmette, Illinois. Mike was born 90 years ago. He's 90 years old. He was born in Kansas City, Kansas. And thank you, Mike, for coming today and agreeing to be interviewed for this wonderful project, the Veterans History Project, gathering the oral history. So to begin with, can you tell me what was your rank and where did you serve?
Well, the highest rank was first lieutenant.
Okay.
They made me a captain when I retired, but that was just so you get a captain's pay.
Mm-hmm.
On the retirement months, I had about 3 or 4 months worth of leave coming. I served in the States from June of '43 till October of '44, at which time we went overseas. In the meantime, in that period, I'd gone through OCS and become a second lieutenant of infantry at Fort Benning, and was assigned to a 75th Infantry Division. We were reporting on the 4th of July in 1944. As I said, October before we went overseas to Wales and did some training in Wales, and then went on into the continent. And we're right outside of Le Havre when the Battle of the Bulge broke out. So we were one of the divisions that was transferred bodily into the Bulge. And we were on the north side of the Bulge there, or the British side, as it turned out. And didn't really get into the killing zone until Christmas Eve, 1944. And then we stayed in action until about the 21st of January. They never wanted you to write anything down in those days, in case you were captured. So it was about 4 weeks, pretty straight combat, to the extent that a rifle company consisted of 187 men and 6 officers. On the 21st of January, we were 19 men and 2 officers left. Now, they're by no means all killed, captured, wounded, and even pneumonia, trench feet, that sort of thing. So at that point, we were moved back to a rear area and re-equipped, and I had my showers after 45 days of not changing clothes. And then we were shipped down to Colmar. There's a little insurgency down there called the Colmar Pocket, which followed the Bulge. We were shipped down there, and we went through that process for somewhere in February. And we were shipped back up north as a division. A division, you probably know, was about 15,000 men in those days. So there was a lot of moving. Our rifle company, there were just 180 of us. Actually, probably never were 180 of us until after the war, when we started getting wounded people back and that sort of thing. So that's a summary, I guess. When the war ended in Europe, we were actually, I was on my way back to Paris on a leave. I got to Paris the day after, and it was the whole damn town was hungover.
I think of those pictures, those photos that you see of the end of the war in Paris and the joy that was going on.
Well, we were the next day. There were two other officers, myself, young junior officers. We sat on the side of our cafes and watched the Air Force strafe the RP Triumph. They come right down the Champs-Élysées. How they kept from running into each other, I don't know, but the fighter planes and bombers don't fly at the same speeds. But anyhow.
Yeah.
And so then we were all shipped into, put into what they used to call cigarette camps, redeployment camps. And they kept us intact because, of course, we were combat experienced infantry division, so we were going to be prime bait for Japanese invasion, which none of us wanted. On the 14th of August, the Japanese surrender, we were a bunch of very happy people because no more wars to go to. And so that's, I was hung around in Europe for quite a bit longer.
And what did you do while you were over there after the war? You hung around Europe, you say.
Well, I was assigned to various and sundry outfits. It took a while. To get home, you had to have a certain number of points. And points were awarded on the basis of time overseas, time in the service, time overseas. And then if you were lucky, you got wounded, got 5 extra points.
It's a tough way to get 5
Yeah,
extra
it was,
points.
but people were wishing they'd thrown some things in and they didn't. If you had enough points, you got shipped out. I had the misfortune to get involved with a drunken colonel who was commanding the camp I was in. And he was fighting some Red Cross girls one night in their quarters. And I was officer of the day, and I came by him and got tangled up with the colonel, and he told me to leave, and I told him I didn't leave until he left. And so finally, he left. I outwaited him. Later on, the Red Cross girls obviously turned this in to their superiors. They did not have to go through channels. And so I got, my feeling is I got frozen because he was a West Pointer and a West Point man. And, he was really upset because he'd not seen combat. And I guess he knew he would never be general. He was, anyhow, I got caught in that. So I did not come home until October of '46. It was about a year later than I should have been home.
Interesting. You mentioned cigarette camps. What is a cigarette camp?
They had some redeployment camps built, have millions of soldiers in Europe, and they wanted to keep them intact. So they just put us up in tent cities, and they named them Camp Philip Morris, Camp Hurricane, Lucky Strike, just known as cigarette camps.
Interesting. Huh. A lot of cigarette smoking back then, too, right?
Oh, we had cigarettes. I remember I almost cried that I got a package while the war was still going on from my father, some cigarettes that he had saved to send me. I had cigarettes in every pocket I owned. They issued cigarettes. We got cigarettes and ammunition and dry socks in the infantry.
So how often would you receive those items? Like dry socks and cigarettes?
Well, it depends on what kind of a situation we were in. A week or two, sometimes frequently, they just come up in the actual combat zone. They didn't get up very far, and they would bring up they brought the food up at night, gave the boys a fire by the Germans. Infantry, you're on the front lines. There's nobody in front of you but bad people, basically. So they bring up a pile of socks, and you'd find something fit. Same thing with rations. They dump up a bunch of rations, canned rations, C rations, K rations.
How was the food?
Well, the rations were marginal, but livable. Most of us, I think, got a little touch of diarrhea after the rations.
Give me an example. Give an example of what you would eat from a ration, what was served.
Well, the C rations, which were left over, I think, from World War I, they really do, because they had little 4 packs of cigarettes in them. And these were cigarette brands that had done, as far as I know, weren't public. Even at the beginning of the war, they weren't available.
Excuse me, Sarah, they want your name and some information on you. Do you have a card, or can you write down? You tell them your full name, and
Sure.
so they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Good. Piece of paper.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
to bother you, but they want to leave soon. you
That's
know.
okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, you know your license plate number? Very good.
Okay. So you were describing the rations, and so you said you think they were from World War One.
Three brands of sea rations: meat and vegetable hash, meat and vegetable beans, and meat and stew. There wasn't much difference between the three. I just had meat and beans made because really it was with meat, hot dogs cut into the beans. They were not frozen; they were just canned. You would get a can opener and open them, and then in the bowls, because everything was frozen, you'd have to build a little fire to thaw the things. Well, you have to be careful when you thaw them, because if you didn't take the can open, they'd become a sort of a little fragmentation bomb, and what you were going to get bombed with was beans, basically, small flakes of metal. And we got the cheap cigarettes, and later we got the K ration, which was a more advanced ration, and it had more variety, and it contained an entree, so to speak, a fruit or a candy bar, and butter, some crackers, and some Nescafe packets. The interesting part is that some of those, we got tropical Hershey's in the Battle of the Bulge. We had to break them up in the butt of your rifle. They were so cold, they were designed not to melt. In the tropics and in the cold of the Battle of the Bulge, there wasn't any problem with it.
They just stay frozen.
Forever. So they were the ration, and they all had to pour cigarettes. But the K rations had a little more lucky strike, sort of thing, Chesterfields and we were used to.
Were there days when you didn't have any food, where you went
A few.
hungry?
Mostly in the bulge. It went 3 days at one point without food. We were getting pretty hungry, but yeah, after all, most of us are somewhere between 17 and 21 years of age, and we were in pretty good condition, physical condition. I can't say we suffered.
What was the when you were there at the Battle of the Bulge? What were the weather conditions like?
Well, it's cold and snow. Very cold. One of the coldest winters we found later on that Europe had gone through. And the bulge started. It wasn't snowing. The bulge started on about the 16th of December. We didn't get involved in it until the 24th. And shortly thereafter, it started to snow, and it snowed, and it really snowed. It was deep, heavy snow, so much so that we had to modify our combat tactics and things like that. We would have to, if we're going to attack someplace, we'd literally have to go in single file, because one man would break the heavy snow for 50 feet, and he'd drop out, and the next guy would break the snow. That's bad tactics, being single file. In combat, you get caught by a machine gun. But on the other hand, we couldn't spread them out because they'd all been exhausted in 10 minutes.
How did you deal with the cold?
Suffered. We didn't have the equipment. So you built fires when you get in. We had a lot of frozen feet, some pneumonia. Put on everything you owned, even including sometimes we had bedrolls, which consisted of a width of one wool blanket. And then we're putting those on and cutting armholes in them, and so they get extra cover. I would have probably had underwear, cotton boxer shorts, wool underwear, long wool trousers. On top, I would have the wool undershirt, a wool sweater, a wool shirt and a wool sweater, and then with jacket, and then an overcoat. That's a lot. There's many right layers of clothing. I thought I was shot one time, or I wasn't. A bullet went through. I was crawling across an open space, and machine gun over it. Like something hit me in the shoulders, threw me flat on my back. I looked down, and I got this big hole here, and I thought, great, I got $1 million wound. That's what we're all looking for, $1 million wound. So I crawled back out of my situation, back to the quiet area. This was at nighttime, this took place. And I said, one of the fellows take over the company. I guess company didn't matter at that point. Take over the company. I said, let's see how bad you're wounded. Well, he kept taking the layers off. The rip gets smaller and smaller. I finally had a little burn mark on my skin. So that bullet had gone through all those layers of clothing.
And just scraped the skin.
Just scraped the skin. So I had to put all the clothing back on. Didn't have any $1 million wound.
Wow. Interesting. Were you frightened? How did you feel when you felt that bullet?
Well, you don't feel anything. You just all of a sudden you're crawling, all of a sudden you're flat on your back. Boom. And you look down and you know what happened. And I knew from the boys who had been wounded that generally speaking when they were shot, they were numb. It was like being hit with a ball bat, it was described to me. The pain came a little later because there was so much shock, trauma. Of course, we were conditioned, hopefully, to get first aid to them before they got into a shock condition, which could be serious. And that was a mental problem. I remember a young replacement who got shot in the hand, and he was just panicking. And I had a sergeant who had been shot in the leg and had a bullet hole gone through the leg, nice hole, didn't hit the bone. And I was going to send him back. I said, will you take this kid back with you? Because he's going to go in the shot. And the sergeant obviously was not. He knew he had $1 million wound. He was happy. He was happy to take the kid back. So he escorted him back because we didn't have time to send anybody else.
So how were they sent back? Like, what did they? Like you say, you were in this deep snow and you were fired upon, and someone got injured. They weren't able to continue on in that trek in the snow. So what do you do with the wounded? How are they?
Back.
And are they sent back with someone who is with your group, or are there medics that are coming up
Well,
to?
you holler for medics.
Okay.
And keep going.
Okay. So the medics are always behind you, and okay.
Well, we had a medic. I had medical corpsmen only. They weren't real well trained. We had medical corpsmen with each platoon. So there were 40-man platoon, or had one corpsman, medical.
What is your most memorable experience? Or maybe there's more than one.
Oh, there were several. Christmas Eve, I was calling through we got in our first combat. I found it, and the Germans were firing at us. I got into a gully, and it started widening. We got toward the road, and I was trying to get towards the road because there was a German tank over there. And we had some white phosphorus hand grenades, which could cause a fire, cause the tanks to burn. Crawling down this gully, I had a sergeant following me. I came to a pile of dirt in the gully, and I stuck my head over the pile of dirt, and I'm looking down the barrel of a German machine gun from a distance of about 24 inches. And the two Germans are talking to each other. So I slid back down the pile of dirt, had a hand grenade, took the hand grenade out, and I said to myself, I thought, my mind went so fast, I thought of at least 10 things I could do. I could charge around the side and shoot them and things like that, and I took the hand grenade out and armed it. You take pull a pin, release the handle, and then you've got 4.5 seconds where the hand grenade goes off. I'm holding this in my head. I'm counting 1001, 1002, 1003. I was going to go 1004, but my hand at 1003 did this. They'd just flip it over my shoulder, and they're between the two Germans. They saw the hand grenade, and they had enough time to start running down the ditch. I rolled over to shoot at them, fired one round, and my gun jammed. I got dirt in it. In the meantime, I thought I'd been hit in the helmet. Something stunned me, so I sat down and turned the helmet around. No. About that time, one of my scouts came out of the woods. He'd been shot in the shoulder and wanted to be patched up, so we patched him up. I found out later on, I realized about a week later that when I'd done this to shoot the German sniper had hit my bullet. It hit the butt of my rifle and slammed it into my jaw, and that's what stunned me.
So you were fired upon yourself, and it bounced off of your...
The butt of the rifle. I'm cut like this. Bang. It's just jammed in my jaw. It just ricocheted off the butt.
And the grenade went off? Did the grenade...
Oh, the grenade went off. And those Germans outran it. Have you ever seen these movies where hand grenades go off and everybody falls down dead? It doesn't work that way.
So they were able to outrun, with just a second to go, they were...
Wait a second. I may have been a little fast on that 1,000.
My goodness.
I've never been sure. The other time was probably even scarier. It wasn't scarier. It was at the end of the bulge, and there were not many of us left. And there was a German machine gun we were trying to get out across a clearing space, maybe 50 feet to the fire break. In the middle of this fire break was a haystack and a Belgian cow eating at the haystack. Well, we started out to get across and the German machine gun opened up. So I went out to the haystack to see if I could get us moving along. And at that point, they started throwing mortar around him. And I'm snuggling up to that cow, trying to get under the cow, literally, so the mortar round. It's hard to explain, but then a voice in my head said, "Mike, you're going to die." This is clear as a bell. Now, nobody heard it, nobody saw anything. And I said, "Okay, God, it's okay." And I had the most peaceful feeling I've ever had in my life. Still, serenity, I'm going to die, it's okay. Well, the mortar round lit on the back of the cow and killed the cow. So when I had that thought, Mike, you're going to die, that mortar round was in the air. And I can't explain it. There's lots of other strange stories that come out of the war. But that was mine. I believe to this day you don't need to fear death.
Mm-hmm. So you were under the cow, and the cow was killed, but,
It was killed.
But you...
Fortunately, the cow didn't fall on me.
That's quite a story.
Yeah. There are lots of them.
So you were overseas. Were you able to stay in touch with your family at all when you were over there?
The mail. It's the only thing we had.
Mm-hmm.
And that would take 2 weeks. After the war, a little better. But basically, I would shrink them and send them to your parents.
Right. Was the mail screened before it got to you at all?
Not that I know of. I did. No, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. We censored mail, outgoing mail, while in combat. It was my responsibility to censor the mail of the people under me. And make sure they didn't give any secrets away out. The probability that we knew anything really classified is pretty remote. Mm-hmm. But that was
just in case.
Those are the military regulations.
Mm-hmm. And you said when the war had ended in the European theater that you were in Paris the day after. So you remember, you can recall clearly that whole atmosphere. You said it was chaotic but fun, or joyous?
Yes, but as I say, that whole town was hung over. Frenchmen don't normally get drunk, but they got drunk that day. Or if they do it more subtly than Americans do.
And moving away from Paris, you saw probably a lot of devastation of the countryside and
villages. Yeah, the odor, the stench from the burned down villages and bodies, garbage. I think I'd recognize it to this day.
It's quite impressed, huh?
Not nice, and of course, the odor of human bodies is once you smell it, you never forget it. Somehow it's distinctive. You almost know instinctively that it's a human body. And of course, during the bulge, a lot of them laid around and were frozen for a while. And they would come and collect the bodies, and they'd throw them on a truck like cordwood. Well, I had one sergeant who wanted to shoot them because they threw his buddy on the truck like that. He was so upset with the way they were treating the body. But that's...
Yeah, that would be difficult. And how did you feel about that, the devastation?
I didn't give it as much thought as I have in later years. I now know the name of the first German boy who killed me. He was 17 years old, and I still remember it. It was Albert Turek. from Vienna. And I remember it because if I had said, don't shoot him, we could have taken him prisoner. But he'd run into our area, we were being attacked, and thrown some hand grenades. And he finally ran out of hand grenades and stopped and said, comrade, and the sergeant in the foxhole next to me said, I'll comrade you, and shot him twice and killed him. Well, I couldn't blame the sergeant in a way, but I blamed myself for not thinking enough to say, don't, let's capture him, let's take a prisoner. I didn't.
So it was a young man from Vienna, you say?
Yeah,
And 17 years old?
Yeah, we looked at his books later.
Did you make close friends when you were serving?
No, of course. Because it's such an experience, yes, to this day. Two closest friends both went on to become college professors. One chemistry, one civil engineering.
Is that what you did after the war?
I'd been in chemical engineering and I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. So I went back and I had met my wife, the woman to be my wife. I'm planning on getting married. So I dropped chemical engineering and wound up in the hydraulic industry. Hydraulic sealing devices, bearings, things like that. Which at that point was rather new. Hydraulics. World War II brought hydraulics to the forefront, the airplanes in particular. But then it was adapted to farm equipment and so forth.
And how would you say the service and the experiences that you had have affected your life?
Well, I often wonder what I would have done in 3.5 years. Where I would have been. But it's one of those moot points. It's a silly thing to think about, but to concern yourself about. It changed my lifestyle. You learned a lot of things. I learned that I never met anybody who didn't know more about some subject than I did. It may have not been a subject I had any interest in, but he knew more than I did, and so you learn to respect people, I think, a little better. After the war, of course, I had privates who went on to become doctors and had vice presidents of engineering for large corporations. These were 17, 18-year-old kids from me. But it's such a culture, and we didn't really tell stories because it's hard to tell a story to someone if you have to explain everything. And if you tell somebody who doesn't know it, they don't know not the freeze words, but the code words. They go with any culture or any specialty. On all the initials, dear God, the Army, live with initials.
And the divisions of the Army, the division of the Navy, the division of the Marine Corps. It's a whole vocabulary.
Oh, it's a whole vocabulary. If it's 88, and anybody with a European, they know what 88 meant. It was a gun. It was a German gun. It was a wicked gun. It was a beautiful gun. It just terrorized us, devastated us. We only called it the goddamn 88. We never said the 88 at that point. But those are things you could say to somebody. You could say BAR, or that's an M1, or that's a carbine, that's the 45, and you don't have to explain it. Your hand grenades, you don't have to explain.
It's a whole different culture.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, did you take advantage of the GI Bill after?
One semester. That's another thing. I went in with 3 years of college. Although the last year was kind of a disaster because everybody was going to war around me. I was in a fraternity house of 52 people by the end of, by June of 1943, there were 16 of us left, and 9 of us had our orders, including me. So I wasted that year. Then the Army finished basic training and put me in a student training program and sent me back to Illinois.
I hate to interrupt Jenny, but Jenny, would you let the technical people know that
Yeah, we're almost done here.
take care of it? I didn't know how to turn it off.
That's
I got it
fine.
on the Wilmette Library homepage, but I didn't know how to turn
It's
it off.
okay,
or get
Larry.
it
I'll
on.
take care of it.
Thank you.
So you only took advantage of the GI Bill for that last year and got it
Last
finished up
semester. Yeah,
last
yeah.
semester and finished it up. Well, is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your experiences, or anything you'd like to say? Any of your feelings about war, or
Well, when I say describe war, I say war is chaos, unremitted chaos. It's just constant. Nothing is ever where it's supposed to be when it's supposed to be there. Another thing I believe is that the dead, that those who were killed, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. It had very little to do with your training or your bravery. It just you're in the wrong spot and you're dead. This is because these things were so much out of your control. Artillery fire, bombs, this sort of stuff. In a rifle company, we only had one concern, that's the people, the Germans in front of us. I didn't hate them. We wanted to kill them because that's the quickest way to get rid of them. But we didn't hate them. I didn't have any particular vengeance in mind. Actually, what I wanted to do was get out of the compound at war. $1 million wound would have been just dandy.
very interesting. Before we close, if I could ask you one more time to state your rank, and I think I failed to ask you where you were trained as well. So if you could give us that just before we sign off, that would be wonderful.
I was trained, basic training was in Camp Grant, which is in Rockford, Illinois. Went from there to Camp Callan, which is now the Torrey Pines Golf Course in San Diego. And from there I went back to the University of Illinois through the training program until January, when I realized why they kept me. They wanted me to be 21 when I went to officers training. So I went in officers training in February and came out in June as a second lieutenant, was assigned to the 75th Infantry Division, to Company C, the 208th Infantry, where I stayed the rest of my military career until the war ended. And I was moved around a little bit to keep me in Europe while they buried this general someplace. And this colonel, I hope they buried him someplace, frankly.
Oh, I think I know which one you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, that's so what else. That's my first one. Went in as a private, actually with drawing sergeant's pay, because the University of Illinois had an advanced ROTC program, and the Big Ten had a deal with them that anybody in advanced ROTC got sergeant's pay when they went in. That was fine until I got to basic training at Camp Grant, and they found out that I was a private getting sergeant's pay. And so all we did was KP. They got back a little. And then stayed. Then you go to an officer candidate, which is a rank equivalent to corporal, which you flunked out of. So yes, and then second lieutenant. First lieutenant somewhere in January, February, I came in with bulge. They handed me my silver bar, and that was it. When I got out of the service, maybe a captain, but that's just because I could draw a captain's pay, which is you'd have to $200 a month. The second lieutenant's got 150, first lieutenant's got 166, and captain's got 200. Private's got 50, private's first class got 52, corporal's got 66, sergeant's got 78. That's the kind of money we were drawing. And we got $10 extra for being overseas. Everybody, whatever rank.
It's an interesting pay scale.
Yeah.
Well, Barry, do you have anything you'd like to say before we finish up the interview?
No, I don't. Only one thing. Almost everybody you talk to, our standard line is, we aren't heroes. Well, we weren't. We buried the heroes. I think we all feel that way about it. You feel almost a little sense of guilt for having survived it. And they didn't. That's what I say. In or out of it, it's got nothing to do. Just you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And war is not a good way to solve anything.
Interesting.
I think that we can give you another 3 hours, but
Well, I appreciate very much you sharing your stories, and I think you're a hero, but I really appreciate it, and I know that your story will be heard, and it's a history that needs to be told, and I thank you very much.
thank you. There are 16 million of us in the armed forces, and there are only 130 million people in the U.S.
Right.
That means almost 12%.
Right.
Go home and take
Right.
care of my obligation.